Today's episode takes us into the heart of positive masculinity, exploring how it shows up in some of the most demanding environments: elite sport, the military, and the workplace. We're joined by Alex Paske, a husband, father, leadership and D&I consultant who's lived in all three. He brings a rare mix of lived experience and deep reflection on what it means to be a man today. Not just strong, but self-aware, courageous, and engaged. This conversation opens up some big and timely questions. Why do so many men feel left out of the D&I conversation? What does it take to build psychological safety in places where typically masculinity means don't show weakness? And how do we redefine strength so that it includes empathy, leadership, and emotional risk-taking? Alex doesn't just talk theory, he talks from experience and practice. He's passionate about making DEI something that includes, not excludes, men, about helping men show up fully in their relationships, their teams, and their lives. If you've ever felt stuck between the old rules of masculinity and the new ones, or unsure where you fit into the conversations about inclusion or leadership, this one's for you. No preaching, no shaming, just an open, grounded invitation to step up, reflect, and lead differently. Alex, welcome to Feel Good.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Tim.
Yeah, and you. And I suppose we should say off the bat that we actually met at our local jiu-jitsu club. And thankfully, I didn't have to spar with you, as I'm not sure how well that would have gone for me, because primarily your early sporting background was in judo from the age of 5. Is that right?
Yeah. It was, it was one of those things where you sort of stumbled into it a little bit, and that's maybe a bit of a theme for my life, stumbling into things. But started at 5. I was tiny. I was an August baby, and for those August babies out there, sympathise. Tiny at school, got a little mum worried I was bullied or just not quite kind of cut out for school quite yet. Went to Cubs or Beavers as it was then, and the man shouted too much. Didn't like it. And then started judo with a friend, and it was one of these things that sort of channeled this competitive behavior, energy, and it turned out I was good with hugging people and sort of wrestling people versus ball sports. And it just kind of went from there, basically.
Yeah, amazing. And how did sort of high-end sport shape your sense of self as a man?
I think, and I talk about this quite a lot, the sport is such a powerful tool for so many brilliant things, whether it's work ethic, like what you get in, you get out kind of mentality, discipline, teamwork, all these sort of things. And that's pan sport. I think there's something slightly different around combat sports in that I tend to say you've only got 50% of say what's going on. The other person is trying to hurt you or beat you or whatever. And so you've only got, you have to wrestle with that in your mind a bit. But I think the big thing in how it shaped me is this idea of humility. There's always someone bigger, stronger, better, faster. And that humbles you really early on. There is always someone better than you. And that stood me well, I think, in life, in that any space I walk into, you kind of need to be ready to be humbled and learn. And I think that goes for any walk of life.
Yeah. Do you think that's true of grappling-based combat sports versus striking-based, the humility and the way that works?
I think I always look at the talk before the fights. That doesn't happen really in the sort of amateur spaces. I do question how much of that is show for numbers, money, whatever, and how much is genuine beef, animosity. I think there's a lot of respect as well. There's something around judo and sort of other martial arts because of the martial bit, the art bit, in that it's founded on respect and versus, talking bad about each other and bringing people's families into stuff. I think it's, I wouldn't differentiate between grappling and striking. I think it's just the levels at which they're operating.
No, the only reason I ask is I think having only really trained jiu-jitsu, my experience of it is that because it is so technical, someone who could come in as a big brawler can be humbled very quickly by someone quote unquote smaller, quote unquote weaker, because they've got technique.
Yeah, I do really recognise that. You know,
Yeah.
you see these videos of people being twisted up by like tiny like man or woman, like you know, blue belt or purple belt or something, and it is there is an element of like outmatch of skill sometimes. You hear online on the socials like untrained street brawler versus trained, and you watch them get absolutely destroyed, and you're like, funnily enough, I've been doing this for 20 years. I kind of know how to handle myself, and it's not that I can take a hit, it's just I kind of know how to handle a body.
But no, that's true. I very much recognize that humility component too in what I do. So of course the army came next for you. Like, how did that come about, and what kind of masculinity did you experience or absorb in the military world?
Oh, big question. So army came to me again, sort of stumbled into it. So I was did judo all my life, went to uni, high performance sport, did a full-time master's degree and full-time sport at the same time, was Team GB, and then hoping to get towards the London 2012 Olympics, because that was my best shot at it at the time. I think in hindsight, I was never going to make it, but I didn't. That was a conversation, and there's probably another discussion there. It was a conversation I didn't want to have with myself at the time. I probably wasn't self-aware enough. But injured my shoulder as well at an Olympic test event, and then had to really reevaluate life. So I was living hand to mouth as a amateur / professional athlete. And then someone recommended the army. Okay. And I stumbled into it. And 9 months later, I was walking up the steps of Sandhurst and was hands down the best decision I've ever made in my life.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. What were you studying before then that you were so happy to let go of?
I did undergraduate masters in chemistry.
Right.
And, I did a year's placement, and it was fantastic because with the environment, people, place, culture, fantastic. But the nature of the work destroyed me. It was too monotonous. And that's when I realised it was so valuable to realise what you don't like, just as much as what you do like. And I knew that wasn't what I wanted, but it was only until someone gave me the nudge, like, hey, the army's a thing, that I then looked back across life and was like, why have I never thought about the army? And, it was then I was on the escalator to the army.
Do you think why you'd never thought about it was because of any expectations others had of you as to what you should be doing?
I'll be honest, I think it was just exposure and role models. I never, it wasn't until I looked back at there was PE teacher, ex-Royal Marine. Yeah. And I, in a way, like, idolized him. I was like, you're amazing. Like, but I never made the link he was built by the Royal Marines and then came into the education space. Yeah, I think it was just role models, opportunity. I would be honest, when I mentioned to my mum that I wanted to join the army, she had an absolute shit fit. And I think there's something about the impression and almost just understanding what the army do. It's much more than just the pointy end of the spear. It's like any business. You need people to do the accounts all the way through to the supporting acts and everything else. And so it was a bit of an education journey. My dad, on the other hand, was kind of like, hey, like, your life kind of mentality, and that was quite nice in a way. Yeah. Okay. And then just went through that journey and got there, went through briefing and all these sort of things. Yeah. And wouldn't change it for the world.
And that said, what kind of masculinity did you experience or absorb in the military world, do you think? Because I guess from the outside, there's this perception of a particularly sort of macho environment, pointy end of the spear. What's the reality like, or what was your reality like?
My reality was, what I would say is, I think up front, the British Army and the forces are a fantastic institution. They do so much for society. But I would say that, you kind of get the culture that you would expect. And so for context, to timestamp it, this was 2012. I think lad culture, if you like, was wouldn't say it was absolutely rife, but there was still kind of a lot of that going on. I think that one of the things that I really did take away, and it was really interesting, was it's because of the nature of the work, but there was so much emphasis. So I was going as an officer, so you're a leader in that space, so you're training to be a leader. There was so much emphasis on the physical, like how you showed up physically, how you were supposed to be the best physically.
Interesting.
To be a leader. Yeah. And there was a lot of links between how you performed physically, how you showed up, were you in shape? And I kind of get that. Like you're trying to role model a very what can be quite a physical job. But but there was an inextricable link that in order to be the leader, you had to be the fittest.
Yeah.
And that drove some, it was wild. We were running so fast, like so fast. And then you get to like the real army or the field arm, and you're like, oh no, I'm cutting around in a tank. Like, I would have liked to lesson on a tank, please. Sort of thing. That was a big takeaway. I think also probably people's assumptions around how, also I would say the gender split in the army when I joined was probably around 10%, 11% female, 90-ish% male. And I think that drives certain ways that we think about leadership. And I definitely sense the idea of this stoic kind of resilient leader, like I wouldn't say like no emotion, but very controlled emotion. That and through my career, reflecting on emotions and what happened in the army, you only really engaged and spoke about emotions when things went wrong. There wasn't like the positive. There was never. It was no emotions. My experience is my experience, and I don't speak for the whole army, but I never got the sense that there was a positive sense of emotion sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. Were you craving that at points?
Or I'll be honest, you don't know what you don't know, right? And I think since leaving the army, and I don't think it's solely an army thing. I think there's something about me and how I've, the environments I've been in, very performance-driven environments. Emotions sometimes are like secondary. Like you like mission task, whether that's like gold medal or doing the thing that you're doing in the army, and being the best at it. I think I've never hadn't really been in much spaces where we spoke about emotions, and then it wasn't until I do the job that I do now in this sort of whatever you want to call it, HR space or people space, and particularly DEI, my emotional vocabulary was shocking. And I think I'd sensed that a lot, and bless my wife, she's put up with me, but like my emotional vocabulary was, I was either happy or angry. I don't know, for those who've seen like an emotions wheel, it's I found it so useful to be like, I'm not angry, I'm just a bit like disappointed or frustrated. Being able to like link, and I'm sensible and I've got a vocabulary, but I never was able to like sense what I was feeling. And I think that's something I'd never done until I moved out of that space and had the time to think about it, or it was necessary for me to do it.
Okay, that's interesting. And we'll come on to what you've done since leaving the army. But I guess we're sort of touching on there a little bit. One of the things I wanted to ask, which is like, where did these cultures, whether it's high-end judo, whether it's your career in the military, like where have they served you, and where have they perhaps fallen short for you?
Really simply, they've served me well in a crisis.
Okay.
When things are happening, and it could be anything. When things are moving fast, you need to act fast. You need to, arguably there's not much, if no space for emotion, because of the nature of what's in front of you. And it could be anything. Everyone's got crises in their life and in the workspace. But when, shit's hitting the fan, sitting down and saying, oh, how do you feel about that? Didn't happen for all the reasons you'd assume. But what I would say is where it didn't serve me and others, in my experience in sport and in the military, is business as usual. And I think that's where, and there's all these like statements or thinking of like, or, and I'm not being disparaging to soldiers or officers, but like the people would say a board soldier is a dangerous soldier. Because we're not on operations, we're not doing things, we've not got this like focus, this thing. And because and reflecting on it, when I talk about business as usual, I mean like in barracks. In the field army, I mean in barracks with your troops training to go do the thing, the operational thing that everyone craves. But when that tempo dropped down, so I joined my troop after the Afghanistan drawdown. My troop had just got back from Afghanistan, and I missed out on deployment to some stuff we were doing in Iraq. But when you were in that interim phase, I think actually being able to talk about having emotional literacy and being open, because, then there needed to be a conversation of around like, hey, I get maybe we're bored, or you think we're like just repeat and stuff and getting ready to do the thing and then not doing the thing you joined to do. I think just being, because I dealt, I'm a 23-year-old leader. of a team of about 35.
Yeah.
My life experience had been sport, bit of chemistry, and I'd done some jobs like Saturday, summer jobs, all that sort of stuff. Like I grew up that being like imposed on me or important that, I had to work to earn some money. But I was managing teams that were like 40-year-old, grizzled, like veterans, if you like. And I was dealing with, talk about crises, like, and things. I was dealing with suicide, addiction, family issues, everything you could think of that happens in society. I was dealing with as a 23-year-old, trying to navigate that with my troops and support them. And I think having a much, and I was, it was still not an emotional space despite having conversations about those things, not being, I didn't feel particularly equipped. And I don't think that's necessarily a failing of the army. I think it's maybe my journey to that point. I didn't feel overly equipped to like really display empathy.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Which was needed.
Yeah, because presumably, I guess the outer perception, if you just think about what life in the army is, you think about, operations and military exercises and that kind of things. But in quote unquote times of peace, presumably most of the time was downtime, BAU, bored soldiers.
That is 90, and it'll depend with operational tempo, right? But that is 95% of your time. Maybe you're out on exercise. So like our exercises, arguably overseas exercise, you're away for 4 months. Like, living in a tank, living in the blocks or whatever. So like that's not operational, but that's doing the thing and practicing the thing. But in barracks, I think that was the biggest challenge. Like your challenge wasn't in the field because everyone knew what they were doing. It was mission focused, task focused. The drama was when you were back and there was everything that could go wrong. And having to deal with that without necessarily being equipped with this like emotional arsenal of ways to talk about how maybe frustrated people were.
Yeah, interesting. Do you think it is a healthy environment for men?
Yes. I think there's fantastic role models.
Yeah.
And I don't have stats to hand, but there's lots of sort of fatherless families, fatherless children that grow up. And I think you've got some fantastic role models, some fantastic routine. I mean, the values and standards of the British Army, let alone everything else. If someone walks away that truly believes things like courage, integrity, discipline, and everything else is important and valuable in society. The conversation that happened, I can't remember what it was, but this conversation about national service, is really vibrant discussion, but. Wherever you sit, I don't think you can disagree that like some values and good role models can stand people in good stead. I also think, and this is almost what I miss the most in a way about the British Army having left, is the power for good in that we recruit from all parts of society and we give so much opportunity to people who've never maybe had that leg up, whatever that looks like for them. I saw firsthand, and I'm getting emotional talking about it, but like firsthand how important that was to people, and someone just actually care about them, and invest in them as a person, like care about them as a person, and seeing the impact that can have was I miss that. I miss that a lot.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because I think partly why I asked about, were there expectations that sent you down the degree route? And now that, both you and I are in the corporate world, I think a lot of men realize there's perhaps not as much purpose in their work as they would like. Perhaps they feel like they're chained to a desk. And I do wonder quite often, have many of us been directed toward a path of, degree, desk job, because that's what you're supposed to do, when in fact, you could have been in a very different environment, which has some trade-offs, as you've highlighted, but actually could be a really healthy place to cultivate good young men.
Yeah, I think, and Gareth Southgate's speech a little while ago about role models.
Yeah.
A lot of my decisions, consciously or unconsciously, have been dictated by role models and influences in my life. And I think that's a big takeaway as as a leader or someone of influence or whoever you are, don't underestimate your impact and influence.
Yeah.
I think that's really important, really important. I decided to do chemistry at uni partly because I didn't know any better. I didn't know what I thought that uni, and I didn't have these influences in life. I didn't know that I thought uni was just an extension of like the things that you did at school. I didn't realize that there was, architecture or mechanical engineering or like civil. I didn't know that was a thing until I got to uni and I'd made this decision. I had a good chemistry teacher. He was a bloke. Good chemistry teacher. He was funny. He made it engaging. And I was like, I'm good at chemistry. I like chemistry. I'm going to go do chemistry.
Yeah.
And that was it. But I didn't have this like wider, almost role models challenging me or guiding me, and whether that's the school setup of you do this 40 multiple choice question and you get told you're going to be a fence erector or a forest ranger or something. I didn't have that like guidance, and I think retrospectively maybe I would have joined the army at that stage. I don't know if I had the right role models and exposure, but again, role models and exposure then guided me towards the army because I had role models and exposure of people who were in the army at the time that then guided me towards that.
Yeah, good. Well, I'm glad to hear it was the right choice for you. And since leaving the army, obviously you're now working externally as a consultant, and we sort of dabble in the same professional worlds now. And we've spoken in the past about how DEI can miss the mark with men. Like I've seen this in what I do. I'm sure you've seen it too. Why do you think that is?
I think there's, what a broad ranging question, but I think there's a lot involved. I think we've come a long way. I think in earnest, this has been in the public eye really in the last 5 years. I think, post Black Lives Matter, post Me Too, all this sort of stuff. I think that if you were to solely pay attention to media, social media, there's this or this. It's a binary. You can be this or this. And I think what's happened is we've lost a bit of nuance. And I think there's where it's lost or does lose some men is that the message they might be receiving is they are a problem or the way in which things have been approached. And I really get that we are not there yet. We are not there in a fair, respectful society or workplace. Like the data suggests that. Like that's not like a contentious thing to say. Like there is more work to be done. But I think it needs to be done in the right way. And I think, let's talk business, but like any change program needs to be thought about. Yeah. And so there needs to be this approach of taking people on this journey of like, we're about to upend your world. Not upend your world, that's a bit dramatic, but we're about to really tell you some things that might inflict this feeling of threat. How are we going to take you through that? And that's not a one size fits all thing. That's not a mandatory training thing going to cover everyone. It needs to be thought of as this journey. And I know lots of businesses do, but in other spaces where whether they've not had the resource or the expertise, I think some people have felt a bit stung by what's going on in terms of trying to progress in the EDI space. And that isn't just men, I would say. I think I've in my work with Berkshire Consultancy, I've walked into rooms to deliver some training, some development work, some discussions where there's been sort of women or black women or everything you'd think under the banner of diversity, people who don't feel like they're supported or feel like they're part of the discussion because it's been done poorly beforehand or reactionary or not necessarily for the right reasons, or people who have not followed through with it and they're just tired and they're fatigued with it. And so there's lots of reasons why people might feel a bit disenfranchised, but men in particular, I would say that it's care and attention to how they might feel. And I think sometimes that's lacking is acknowledging it, even if the data suggests otherwise, that men are still in this privileged position or in some instances, actually just empathizing with how they might feel about what's going on at the moment.
Yeah. I think the data point is an interesting one because there's certainly some men who are doing very well and hold positions of power and hold earning power. But I'm sort of visualizing the mass middle, right, of people who aren't, C-suite, who are feeling left behind professionally, personally,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps feeling attacked by some of this work, and what is their experience of being told, oh, men are showing up like this in the workplace, or men are winning all the battles, when that is just not their experience.
Yeah, no, I do agree. I totally agree. And I think just the discourse around diversity is improving, because at first diversity was this physical thing. It's what you could see or what you could hear. And now the I guess people are maturing, I guess, in their understanding of diversity of thought and experience. And 100% in low socioeconomic areas, such disadvantage, such inequality in 99% white spaces, if you like, or male environments. Such inequality. And I think that's maybe where this initial what we've experienced so far has missed the mark a little bit, with those communities where they don't feel like things are fairer for them as a consequence of what's been and that's it. I think that's on everyone, like in terms of their maturity in this thing.
Yeah, and 100%. And look, we're both working in these small bubbles of organizations in London doing DEI work, and we've just touched on a massive societal issue there. But if you think about what you're experiencing, what I'm experiencing, where do you think and let's call it male resistance to DEI work, because that's what we're talking about, but where do you think some of the resistance to DEI work has merit? Like, where has the movement gone wrong in a way that has turned men off from it, and globally is sending them to the far right, and in the US we're seeing stuff being rolled back? Like, where is there some light in what's being rejected?
Yeah, and I think what I would frame this these global headwinds, wherever it is, and it's not just America. You're seeing it in lots of bits of the world where there's this kind of pushback or rejection of DEI, or trying to create more equitable, fairer spaces. And I think actually I'm using these words, fairer and respect, because I think that's nobody can disagree with that. And I think there's something there, but where the pushback is coming from, and some of the correct pushback, is where businesses or any organizations have had not solid foundations. They feel like it's the right thing they should do, and it's of the moment, it's reactionary. People will talk about platitudes or trying to avoid a PR, fuck up or whatever. If that's the foundation upon which you are doing all these things, it's the old proverb, building on shaky foundations, building on sand, the house is going to fall down. And I think this is where people quite rightly unpicking some of the things that have been happening. I also think there is where there are the right intentions, but it's not being. So I think that a big thing is the intentions are there, but the execution is poor. And whether that's understanding, or this is a new space, or it's just not legally sound. And that, that hits the news quite a lot in terms of positive action, positive discrimination and stuff. And that creates a sense of pushback. But I think ultimately it's where they are right, or where, some people are right that things have gone too far, or we can't do that, or whatever, is by not sort of taking this holistic view of diversity, I think, and particularly, we're seeing a much more mature approach to socioeconomic background and things like that. So, for example, in the tech space, only 9% of employees come from a low socioeconomic background, and that's when we think about diversity of experience and thought, that's something to be improved upon.
Yeah, 100%. So in your work and what you're seeing in the organizations you're working with, what does it mean to bring men into the D&I conversation, rather than them experiencing, finger wagging or shaming or whatever it may be that turns them off it?
Yeah, and I think what I would say up front is I would never say not to call out inappropriate behavior. That's so important to do that, because that, I don't think it gets done enough, and that creates some of the problems we see in here. But I think there is a big difference, and this it's now a turn of phrase, calling in rather than calling out, is it comes back to that empathy bit. And something that was a big reframe on how I think just generally in life is this idea of, rather than like thinking what's wrong with you, like every time you disagree or something happens, you're like, whoa, or like you want to react to it, rather than being like, what's wrong with you, and like, type of jump in, be the martyr, be the savior, or whatever. Actually, like, what's the reframe is like, what's happened to you, and it's not like feeling sorry, because that's not what we're doing. It's understanding that how they've showed up, how they're acting, how they're talking, it's just been shaped by their experiences today. That's not their fault. And I think when I was doing these hard yards in the army, trying to like, I walked in, I used to call it the lion's den. I'd walk into the lion's den, and it was late entry officers. So people who'd done 20, 25 years as a soldier, done some fantastic, like brilliant. They're at the top of their game, and then they move across into the officer space as sort of as a captain. And the session was labelled Army Diversity and Inclusion. And I used to walk into this like theatre, like to deliver this, and it was mandatory training. And that was a tough gig.
Okay.
That was such a tough gig.
Paint a picture for us. What was tough?
Oh man, I mean, and this is my reflections now. Is what I challenge corporate spaces with, or organizations, is do you want to be right, or do you want to win? And I think we were rightfully labeling the session D&I training. But if we reframed it to something like teamwork, and that's what the army did, we had this kind of reframe and op teamwork stuff, but let's label it as something this is about performance. This is about an inclusive culture. And it's almost, you can't argue with this stuff. But I used to walk into a room of like 40 people like this. And I was like, it's going to be tough. But my point here is that what I lent into, and I learned quite quickly, is to make it personal for them and disarm this whole conversation by almost being like, let's be future focused. You are here, and you are shaped by your experiences and your influences and your role models today. It's the media you've had, the education, all this sort of stuff. That means that you show up like you are. And all I'm providing now is just almost like another inject, another experience, another perspective to like build on that. And this doesn't make you a bad person. I'm not calling you a bad person, but let's just like add this other inject about how we show up, whether in the EDI space but it was all about performance, all about operational effectiveness. Arguably, if you're doing something in the military that doesn't support better operational effectiveness, it's not worth doing. And that's how we had to. That was the journey I went on. Was like we had to frame it in that and make that really real, really, really real. And I think that was the key, and being able to take people on that journey in 90 minutes. Of I'm not calling you a bad person. You are who you are, and I'm empathizing with that. And I get you might resist this, but this is about operational effectiveness. So let's talk about that. And I think that stood me well in now sort of going in, realizing what the outcome is, like business performance, better engagement, whatever it is, you need to kind of take people on that journey.
And have you seen examples, or do any spring to mind of where men, whether that's in the army or out of it, like really got that, like a penny dropped for them on what it was you were sharing?
I think, and I touched on it, making it, the minute you make it personal and they reflect on their own experiences, and also like, and again, tough gig, like trying to get people to be psychologically safe and vulnerable in the space of 90 minutes amongst all their peers and blah, blah, blah. And that goes for army and any space, right? That's the challenge in my work now, is how do you get people to be genuinely vulnerable in this like bite-size space where people don't have time to do like much development work. I think the minute you make it personal and you start talking about, well, this could be your family. This could be, this could be your daughter, or this could be your other half, or whatever it is. I think also people learning about, if you can get them to a space of vulnerability where people can, as colleagues, can share things about themselves they might otherwise not know, that can be really transformative, because penny drop stuff is like, that's why you show up how you do.
Yeah.
And I never thought about that. Like, as in the going back to my thing of, rather than like, what's wrong with you? Like, you've got this co-worker, this colleague that you just don't get on with, and they're infuriating, but you've never taken the time to think, you've always gone to the what's wrong with you space, rather than the, hey, like, I'm feeling like this isn't working, like, and you have like good feedback conversations, and then you dig, you get curious rather than furious, and then you start like digging, and then you're like, makes sense. And that's the penny drop for in these spaces. It's, they realize that if you take the time to understand your co-workers and afford vulnerability with each other, to be honest and share what's going on, you can be like, now I get it.
Yeah.
Now I get, and now we can work better together.
Yeah.
Towards operational effectiveness or business output or whatever, because we've been able to talk about the tough things. Yeah. And I think, going back to emotions earlier, like, that's so important. So important. But yeah, penny drop moments in that space of either that could be my insert, family member, or I've been doing that with a colleague, and that's why I'm not getting anywhere with them.
Yeah, exactly. That's interesting. The thing that popped into my head there was, I'm sober, and I went through the AA process to get that way. For some reason, the thing that popped into my head was sitting in the AA rooms for the first time, where you've got people who would not share things externally, but you sit in a room with people who are on the same page as to why they're there, and they start to share things, and pennies drop, and there's vulnerability, and you start to understand why people might be feeling a certain way, or why they might be, suffering with an addiction or something. And I'm not saying that those two environments correlate, but there is something about making things personal and understanding the root cause of behaviors.
Yeah, I think the other point there is that that's an optional space, not a mandatory space. You've chosen to be there. And I think there's always this discussion around, do you make, and this isn't solely about EDI stuff, but do you make EDI mandatory, or do you make it optional, and people can vote into that space? So you build training culture around dialogue and engagement, rather than mandatory tick box stuff, because we know that fails. Like, there is don't get me wrong, there is a legal aspect that companies need to abide by, and so must their employees, but that's sort of bare minimum. So how do we build a really solid culture? And that's where engagement and dialogue and coming into these spaces willing to be vulnerable.
Where do you come down on that now?
Oh, tough. I think what I would say with all of this, it is so context specific. So like, people within organizations are on their own journey, and so you have to understand the business, the context, to know what will work for that. And it's like a recipe. Like, you need to get the right mix of engagement, dialogue, legal stuff, business performance. Like, there's like a myriad of like interventions, workshops, whatever you want to call them, that you have to get the right recipe mix, I guess, to suit the context and what the prevailing dialogue is and culture is, and also what the end output is. Why are you doing this? Why do you need to have these conversations? And I think that's sometimes the question that almost isn't asked enough. Is you doing it, again, it comes back to what we said earlier, like, are you doing it just because you feel like it's the right thing, or are you doing it because there's a definitive output that you want to achieve as a consequence of doing this work?
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Because if you think about, like, the spectrum of men who are involved in these programs, you're going to have some people for whom, like, they get it, they're your champions, they're already, on it, reading the books or whatever it may be. You've got some who just fundamentally disagree with the principle of, inclusion. Yeah. And then you've got everyone in between. And it's kind of folly to expect one workshop to properly work with that entire spectrum of men.
Yeah, I think, and I've been thinking about it recently, this idea of, I'm not from the communications or marketing space, but you will segment your target audience. You will tailor engagement and communication towards the different groups. And does sophisticated culture change EDI work look like almost like applying different techniques, different methods, and almost segmenting your market, your target audience of the organization to, okay, well, for the for the group that aren't going to shift, we just need to make sure that legally they understand what's going on and what they need to do. For those in the middle, we need to do these kind of things. It needs to be discussion based. It needs to be about them. It needs to be personal. We need to really bring them on this journey. And then for the people who are there, read the book, got the badge, brushed their teeth to it type thing. How do we support them? How do we platform them? How do we make them role models in that bring the that middle 60%, 40% or whatever, like along with them? And I think you kind of need to be able to have the ability to do it all.
Yeah.
Like if you're just doing this, you're not going to do this. If you're just doing this, you're going to alienate more down here. And I think it's like people talk about blended learning, blended approach. It's the blended approach, I think, and the right recipe mix, if you like, is the way forward.
Yeah, definitely. Because I was thinking when you were talking about the army too, around army values, one of which is respect for others. That's a pretty strong anchor, right? To which probably everyone in that room would be able to, to latch some feelings towards. And then what you do with that, is going to look different depending on where people are. And I think it's probably the same in the workplace too, right? Where if you say, like, do we all want to work in a place that's fair? Like where no one's bullied, when no one's harassed? Like, can we all start there as a point of agreement? Okay, cool. Like, so what do we do with that?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's the work that we do. We say that let's not use, things that are solely DEI language. Let's use your values. Let's use what your business output is like, and anchor it to that. So then it, again, taking people on this change curve or whatever you want to call it, like it's less like in your face, less intrusive, and it doesn't come with. And even like people talk about recently, like allyship being this like slightly divisive word, or like turning people off. Call it what you like. Call it like being a supporting colleague, being like, whatever it is. Like, I think, and this is where do you want to win? Yeah. Or do you want to be right? The right thing to do is to call it what it is. Call it anti-harassment and discrimination training. Call it whatever it is, whatever, be honest with your people. Or do you want to win? Do you want to actually have impact in this space? And let's call it teamwork. Let's call it performance, but just through a different lens, just a people lens, and some spaces that the data suggests we need to go hunting after because we're not good there. Yeah.
It's almost like, Alex, you're talking about nuance, which is perhaps something we're lacking these days. You've talked also about, I guess, leadership in the army, leadership in the corporate world. Like, what does strong leadership look like to you today, especially as a man, or do you even think about it as a man?
I think being really honest, and sorry, I will challenge you on strong leadership. I think there's, because I think what's not strong is weak, and I think there are some labels that come with strong and weak leadership. And I think in like my earlier reflection about leadership being intrinsically linked to the physical attributes of someone, I think that's where my mind went with strong and weak. So I think like effective, ineffective leader is where I would go with it. And so I think what links to that is like, a leader is that, you can be anyone to be a leader. Like, and I think what I would say, and it'd be remiss of me not to say up front, is this, how they talk about it at Sandhurst, and, people laud Sandhurst as one of the best, leadership academies in the world. And my experience would suggest, I think it is. I think it does really expose you to stuff. Their motto is serve to lead. And that's just to like get your head around that. Sometimes is really like takes people back, like, but you're at the front, right? Like you're the focal point. So what are you doing, like serving? And that serving like brings to mind like subservience and supporting, enabling. And I think that's really important. So what I would say is an effective leader needs to be almost paradoxical, without getting too like fancy with words, but like needs to do both. And you can't, like, if you are just doing one type of thing, that's only going to work for one situation, one type of environment. So you need to serve and lead. You need to be vulnerable and robust or resilient. Like there's so many different paradoxes where you need to be both and almost at the same time. You need to be in the moment, dealing with, what's right in front of your face, and horizon scanning. Like, to be an effective leader, you need to, there's so many things that you need to juggle, I think, to be an effective leader. And I think the real basis of leadership is like, and this is coaching, this is whatever, it's like being like comfortable in your own skin. Like there's loads of things, like get your own house in order before you start trying to sort other people's out. Like, right?
Yeah.
Because, you know, if you don't know how, and I reflect back, like I didn't really know myself really as a junior leader, and it was kind of like it was, you know, working through stuff. But like, if you're not confident, and this is where sports stood me in good stead. Like I was humble enough to know that others knew more, could do better, all this sort of stuff. And I think that there's something there about self-awareness. But if you're not coming from a space of really like owning the gremlins and like knowing what triggers you, knowing like what you're good at, like, and what you're not good at, like that's so important. Like it can feel, and it does feel like, I think as a junior manager, junior leader, you need to be the best at everything that everyone's doing in your team. And that's not true. You just need to like make the most of like the assets, the team, the whatever you've got. So I think that's the first thing. And then it naturally builds, okay, I've got my shit in order. Now how can I like deal with relationships, interpersonal skills? And then that builds on, okay, cool, I can do this stuff that's in my immediate sphere of influence. Cool, next level. What am I doing as a leader to shape things in the system? What am I doing? Stakeholder management, engagement, like really like in this horizon scanning stuff. And I think there's kind of like the three levels. There's like the self, there's the team or the people around you, and then there's like the system, enterprise, whatever you want to call it. It's kind of, you know, if you can build those blocks, I think that's what makes for effective leadership.
Interesting. It feels like that requires some psychological safety in spaces, like particularly where masculinity comes in the form of like, don't show your weaknesses, to like know thyself, you know, own the gremlins, as you said. How do you create environments where like that's okay, or shift men to a place where that's okay to do that?
If you're a leader, if you're a manager, you have to role model it. You have to, you like, you know, we talk about courage in the army, like you have to lean into it. Like you have to show that it's okay and it's safe. And, you know, there's a really good story from when we were doing this work in the army, this cultural transformation program under teamwork. And one of the questions that units got asked were, you know, when did you last cry? And I think like infantry unit, 95% male, pretty, you know, operational, done some stuff. And one of the stories that we heard was, you know, there was almost like sniggering, like when this was asked in like a big room. It was, imagine like assembly hall type vibe, unit level, maybe like 400 people in the audience. And then the most senior soldier in the room stood up and said, you know what, I cried, you know, insert date, and I do it every year. And that's because I lost my daughter on this date.
Wow.
And what happened to that unit was like, and you know, trying to measure this stuff's impossible. Measuring culture, measuring impact, measuring trust, all these sort of things. But what happened to that unit was it made it okay. And that this is my experience. Like emotions then became really relevant in terms of performance. The most senior person was vulnerable enough to share that with people, and it gave permission. Gave permission for everyone else in the room to take off this like, I must be resilient, I must be robust, and hell yeah, you must be. But you can, but it's the both and thing again. You can be that, but you can also be like emotionally available and vulnerable to others where it's needed. And so I think that's really important. And how you can role model that, maybe don't like open up a meeting with last time you cried. But I think being vulnerable in a very performance focused way can be something like, and I've worked with some fantastic leaders. One of them used to always say, we're coming up with a battle plan, strategic plan, whatever you want to call it, like a thing. At the end, they would always ask, how are we going to fail? What's going to unhinge this plan? And that's like a vulnerability in a way of like, I know I've probably not caught everything. And to a person in the room, he would go around and be like, how are we going to fail? 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 Until someone's, it provided it was asking the right question to provide a psychologically safe space to get what he needed. What's going to unhinge my plan? What's going to mean people might die as a consequence of this? Yes, I am insert senior rank, but tell me how we're going to fail. That's really powerful. And I think that's vulnerability, but in a very performance, operational, effective sense. The other thing that I would say, and another great question people ask, and I ask myself, is whose opinion am I missing? Because again, there's another form of vulnerability there. Like, I do not, it comes back to humility, I guess. I know I don't see everything, do everything, have everything to hand. So who do we need to bring into this space? Is it the junior employee that's just turned up because they bring brilliant experience from another business, or from, they will be able to tell us the latest thing that we're missing, or how our communications are landing. And I think that's another way that you can show up vulnerability in a very non-vulnerable, non-psychologically safe space, but still role model it.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because what's coming up for me, the word you use there is vulnerability, but actually each of those examples, the soldier who shared about when he cried, the leader who asked about failure, the person who brings in someone whose opinion they don't know, actually that requires great courage. Each of those examples require great courage, and I wonder if that's something that's missing in modern masculinity. Is like, you have to be like bloody strong to be able to be vulnerable, because you're opening yourself up, and you're doing so in a way that shows emotions that you normally keep bottled up. And I think there's something about this role of courage in modern masculinity. And for me, what really leaps out there is in each of those examples, the thing that has been displayed is vulnerability, but requires great courage to do that.
Yeah, I think, and courage is, it's one of the Army's values, British Army's values. It's in the spaces that I've been in the British Army, in high-end sport. Courage is often seen as this physical thing, and I totally get it. Like, I really get it. People are recognized and rewarded for physical courage, acts of bravery, 100%. And I'm not detracting from that. I think there's something, we talk about moral courage, or talking about myself as if I'm still in, but talking about moral courage. And I think my challenge to anyone is, how do you capture those moments of moral courage? How do you recognize that person challenged a senior individual, or challenged, made the right call in difficult circumstances? And I think courage is that ability to go from overcome the friction of inaction to action.
Yeah.
That moment of inertia of like, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
I'm going to do this. But that can only come from a place of self-confidence, self-awareness, and that's the base. And I think you're right. That's the basis for courage is hey, owning it and being able to put yourself out there.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, again, getting your own house in order allows you to be vulnerable and show courage, because you have conviction in what you're about to say or do. But I think the real challenge is, how do we reward and recognize moral courage in any space, because it's not done enough.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think particularly if you think about men's relationship with the DEI agenda, or pick any other quote unquote progressive topic, whether it's sustainability or something like that, there is this feeling that, or there can be this feeling that it's not a masculine thing to throw your weight behind, right? To be vulnerable, to share your feelings, to talk about things that have gone wrong. And I wonder if a big unlock for some of the challenges we've touched on earlier would be to latch it onto a different form of masculinity, which is tapping into courage, just not in the way that we're expected or have seen it in the past.
Yeah. So just a final thought on that, and I was talking with a colleague recently about it, is a way to bolster courage in these moments is consider whose discomfort is most important in this moment. Is it mine and my discomfort about to do this thing, or is it actually the discomfort that decision or that behavior or that thing is going to cause for others?
Yeah.
And I think that for me, and this, I am an oxymoron, right? I am petrified of conflict.
Yeah.
I do not like conflict. I'm learning, but I have been arguably an elite fighter since teenage years. I've been 11 years in the British Army, but I still don't like conflict. I don't think many people do. And so there's something around, what are your coping mechanisms? How do you show courage? Because that, we don't do it enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, I feel like we only glossed over judo and the army, and we could keep going for another hour, but at some point I need to land this plane. So I'm thinking of like the man who might be listening, who is kind of on board with some of this stuff, but maybe they're not 100% sure, or maybe they've heard other people say that this has all gone too far, whatever it may be. Like, what's one action you think every man could take today to sort of feel better and do better in any of the topics that we've spoken about?
Oh gosh. For me, the big one, and it is, you see it all the time, is sleep, and it's like a health thing. It's a psychological thing. For me, my biggest game changer is realizing that there's only 24 hours in the day, and you can try and eke out as much as you can, but eventually you're going to fall over if you do not sleep. And we see that, on operations. You see that in sport. I went down with shingles when I first went. Started doing proper, full-time 20 plus hours a week, high-end training at university. So I wasn't sleeping enough. I was trying to do a degree, do the social bit, do everything. And I just didn't sleep enough. And it's really basic. Everyone will say it, but I think there's something really powerful in just like the hygiene around that.
You've got 2 kids at home and one of them's like 5-6 months old. So how are you doing against your own standards at the moment?
Not practicing what I preach right this moment.
Okay. It comes with the territory. And is there a book that you think every good man should read?
Oh, I'll be cheeky and say 2, I think. And my wife will roll her eyes at this because I always talk about it. But I'm not a big reader. I struggled with reading and wasn't interested at school. And it wasn't until I sort of joined the army that I realised I need to learn a bit about the world to make me effective at what I did. And one of the first books that really got me hooked onto reading was George Orwell's 1984, and everyone probably heard of it, knows it. I think it's really relevant today. Interesting story, and out of the army now ish. But I was so hooked on this book that I read it whilst commanding a tank in Canada. So it was kind of like you have a driver. I'm not driving it, heaven forbid. But drivers doing their thing. I'm commanding it. You stood in the cupola over this tank. You just big road move. And I'm just like stood in this thing, like roving, follow on in front. And just like reading this book, being like lapping it all up. And I think it's just, there's so much like parallels to what we see in life, without throwing out too many buzzy words, but like post-truth world. Just being, as a man or anyone, being able to critically analyze what you're seeing and hearing, and also what you're feeling, and exploring that, I think that unlocked something in me where I was like, okay, I need to think bigger. I can't just think about what's in front of me. And I think the other book for those interested in the EDI space is The Person I Mean to Be by Dolly Chugg. And it talks about okay, cool, you kind of get the agenda, and you recognize that a better, fairer, more respectful, equitable society is a good thing. What do you do about it? And it takes you on this journey of being a believer to a builder, and taking action in that space. And I found that for my trade, but also for just generally as a person, just really useful.
Being a builder of
more fairer, equitable, respectful spaces. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I sort of want to go back to reading 1984 in the back of a tank, but I think that might throw us off timing-wise. I was about to say, when you said 1984, same, but then you moved on to the tank thing. And
a different experience.
Exactly. Loaded, but what does healthy masculinity mean to you?
Whoa. Healthy masculinity. For me, this is... And this might be just shaped by my experience, but being of service to others, I think, is quite important. And serve to lead, like I said, the army leadership motto. But being of service to others and putting others before yourself, and that can take us to shaky grounds. But that's not at the behest of your own health, mental health, physical health, whatever it is. But being willing to recognize others' needs before your own, I think, can be really important. The old phrase, leaders eat last, and all that sort of stuff springs to mind a little bit. So I think there's something around service. But I think there's also something around, and I've said it a couple of times now, but like humility, being comfortable in your own skin, because I think healthy masculinity is being able to sit back and like be like, how do I actually feel about this? Like, bit of critical analysis. Like, am I reacting? What's shaking me here? Like, and being able to and this is why I've gone on this, I'm not going to say like journey, but having an emotional literacy that allows me to differentiate more than just happy and angry.
Yeah,
Like, has been so important for me to like be this man who can feel comfortable wearing yellow. I bloody love yellow. I've always loved yellow, but like I never felt comfortable to wear it, and like all these things. And it's realizing that no, I am good enough. I'm comfortable. Like, I'll take on board what other people say, but like, hey, I'm me, and this is how I show up, and things like that. And I think that's what healthy masculinity is self-awareness, self-confidence, and supporting others where you can.
Yeah. Nice. So what's your, I mean, I sort of started this episode talking about men who might feel stuck between old ways of thinking and new ways of thinking. And I do feel like, and again, we've spoken about this in the past, there is this massive group of men in the middle who are being barraged from either side by messages. Like, what's your message to men who feel stuck between sort of old ways of thinking about masculinity and new ways of being?
Yeah, I think it comes back to a lot of this, what's important to you, self-awareness, understanding where you are in the world. And hey, I'm mid-30s. A lot of people my age, I guess, have potentially inherited a script that's no longer valid in this world. And I know it gets that gets spoken about a bit, this script we inherit. And we're still finding out what that looks like and what that means. And I think comparison is the enemy of like happiness, right?
Yeah.
So looking to other, there's some brilliant role models. There's some really healthy role models out there. There's also some unhealthy role models. And so I think it's being able to like, what do you want? How do you want to show up in that space to support your friends, your family, your workspace, whatever it is? And I think it's care less about what others say and do and more about what's important to you. And we don't do that work. I don't do that work enough. Like what's important to me? Where's my value base? What have I inherited that I might need to let go of? That's quite important, right? Because like I said, we're shaped by our experiences today.
Yeah.
And it comes back to the critical analysis. Yeah. What's not helpful, and what am I hearing or feeding, or what environments am I in that just aren't healthy and supportive of what I truly feel and want to do.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I particularly like that phrase of inheriting a script that's no longer valid. I'm sure that'll resonate with a lot of men. So look, where can people follow your work, connect further, and are there any final thoughts or invitations to the men that are listening?
Yeah, it's a classic LinkedIn. So do follow, have a look on there. Do everything from workshops, keynote speaking, all the sort of stuff you'd expect, and consultancy with Berkshire Consultancy. Final thoughts. What I would say, and we've not spoken about it, but I've really come to this reckoning in life recently that because of the nature of the environments I've been in, I've always been highly competitive. And I can't help but feel that I have left a wake of lack of connection.
Interesting.
And I don't want to get finished too heavy, but because I've always put mission and task or performance above everything else, there have been some casualties.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying, it comes back to the energy thing. It's only 24 hours in a day. I'm not talking about this sacrifice of social life when you're a high performance athlete. That's different. It's connectiveness and friends. And I'm in a space now as a dad of 2, time is short. And I look back at my friends and I wish I'd worked harder. I really wish I'd worked harder at building stronger connections. I've got some fantastic friends. It's not to say I haven't. And friends serve purposes all the way from, a 3-month, 6-month relationship all the way to lifelong friends. Yeah. But I wish I'd worked harder and I'd had more emphasis put on me as well as put on myself of how important having a really strong support network of friends around you in times when things are shit.
Yeah.
And I look back and think I put too much onus on performance and high performance being the best and not enough time and effort. And it doesn't have to be a lot, it can be a text.
Yeah.
And I really regret that.
Yeah. Okay. So if you were to dial down performance, dial up engagement and connection, that might be the balance.
Yeah. And again, you can do both and it's just a text.
Yeah.
And it's not, I'm not talking about the social events. It's just staying connected. And the best way to be connected is be emotionally available to others and engage with people on a deeper level than the latest score or whatever. So yeah, I think that's what I'd probably leave with.
Yeah. It's a beautiful sentiment. Thank you, Alex, and thank you for everything you've shared today. I think we'll end it there then.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
If you got something from today's conversation, do me a favor, like, subscribe, or share this episode with someone who might need to hear it. It really helps the show grow and reach more men who are ready for change. And if you're curious about coaching or want to dig deeper into writing and reflections around purpose, well-being, and modern masculinity, visit thefeelgoodfolk.com. Everything's there, and you'll find the link in the show notes, as well as all the resources that Alex mentioned too. This podcast is about rallying good men who want to grow, lead, and live with intention so that together we can reclaim masculinity as a force for good. Thanks for listening. Work hard, be kind, and I'll catch you at the next one.